Hello and welcome to Unrecognised Heroes, the official podcast brought to you by the National AI and Cyber Awards. This is the podcast where we dive into the latest innovations, challenges, and success stories in the world of AI and cybersecurity. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by a fantastic guest whose work is as compelling as it is important to the work that is going on in tech right now. Genevieve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, I know that's not your official title. You are a Dr. Genevieve
hmm
Butterski. Let's start with your journey because it really is incredible from the conversations that we've had before and learning all about you. So, can you set the scene for our audience? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. Oh gosh, where do I start? So I have a doctorate in clinical forensic psychology and I also have an MBA. My career started, I don't want to say how many years ago, but before I got my doctorate, I started working in mental health crisis. And so I spent a lot of time working with police. I was actually part of one of the original crisis intervention teams in New Jersey with the police. And then I decided to go back to school, get my doctorate. And the first job I got as a psychologist, I worked for the Department of Corrections in Oklahoma, and I worked in their maximum security prison, which also housed death row. And while I was there, I was also part of the crisis negotiation team, which is what people would know more commonly as the hostage negotiation team. So I did that for a while. Um, and then I guess I was there about like 3.5 years, and I was like, oh, I want to do something else. And I'm originally from the East Coast, so I wanted to come closer to my family. And I accepted a position at a state hospital in Virginia. And I'm in way up in the mountains in Virginia, so which is quite nice. And I spent a couple years there, and I did a lot of forensic work. When we talk about forensic work, I was doing assessments for like not guilty by reason of insanity, competency to stand trial, civil commitment assessment, and I would also with the inpatients, I would work with like the folks who were there on like a graduated release program who were adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity. Um,
Okay.
did that, and then COVID hit, and I was like, all right, I'm kind of burnt out. I've been doing this kind of work in this very, very high stress, high stakes environments for years. And I was like, I want to do something else. So my mom's like, so do it. And I was like, but I have my doctorate. Like, I've gone so far. And yeah, a friend of mine convinced me to just go get my MBA because I'd been talking about that and I wanted to do more consulting work. And I ended up getting my MBA at LSU and then worked in ed tech for a while, started my own consulting business, which I still have. And then I also co-own a private practice. So I am busy.
There's a lot going on there, and what an extensive career pathway that you've had. So, from working in a supermax prison
hmm
and negotiating hostage situations to now consulting on AI ethics and cyber psychology, if you will.
hmm
So, what inspired, I guess, that transition from forensic psychology to the digital space, apart from your mum saying, go ahead and do
Just,
it?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just like one day I didn't just wake up and say, oh, I'm going to work in cyber, because my entire career was always, I mean, I read Silence of the Lambs when I was 14, and I'm very sure that had a drastic influence on what I did in my career. Um, and so when I got my MBA, I was like, I'm not sure what I want to do with it yet. I worked in ed tech, and while I was working in ed tech, um, I got really interested in the privacy laws and the regulations around um, online usage and data privacy. To me, it made sense because forensic psychology is more about the application of psychology to the law. So when I was looking at those, and as a psychologist, you don't even think about data privacy. Well, you do, but it's so ingrained in everything we do that it wasn't something I really paid attention to. So it was very interesting to see it from the corporate standpoint, and that's how I started to get into really into privacy, which then led into AI governance. And I was working with a lot of smaller companies in the EU on, as they were like building their products that they wanted to bring to the US.
And do you feel as though your background in forensic psychology gives you a sort of unique perspective, I guess, in cyber psychology and the trust and safety space now that
hmm
you're operating within?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because there are things that I see, um, just because of the career and from the individuals that I worked with throughout my career that other people don't see. So, like, I see how things can be used for bad. I can see how somebody would exploit it. And that's probably one of the first things I see. I'm like, oh, yeah, that looks good. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, I can see how somebody could do this, and I could see how this can be used for that. And doesn't always make friends with people up in like, the C-suite when they're like, hey, we want to sell this. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, this could be a bad idea. Um, and then the other thing too that I hadn't really thought about until more recently, probably the last like 6 months, there's a really big case going on with character AI. I'm not
Okay.
involved in that case at all, but one of the people who's involved in the case posted the chats. So if you're not familiar with this case, what essentially happened is that Character AI is being sued by the family of a teenager who completed suicide, and they're saying that these chats from the chatbot Character AI influenced that suicide. And when I took a look at those chats, that was some of the same manipulative things that I would see coming from like serial offenders in prison. Like it literally could have been lifted. Like when you work in a prison, like you spend so much time like spend
Yeah.
discussing manipulation and being aware of it that I spotted that immediately. And I was like, oh, I have seen like very professional adults get worn down and be compromised from things like this. Like, how can a kid who's just trying to like just start just start their lives, like understand the manipulation that's going on with all of this? So it's, of course, set me down another rabbit hole that I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Absolutely. It sounds as though there's so many layers, and perhaps on the surface, sorry, people perceive
Hmm.
it as creating AI for good, but
Hmm.
actually not quite addressing all of those, I suppose, multifaceted issues that come with it. And
Hmm.
like you say, you as an expert in the space have seen this in different areas that have translated across now to
Hmm.
this platform. So that's incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not something I ever thought I would end up in. Like I was never
Yeah.
like a tech person growing up. I was like, it just didn't interest me. And now that I'm here, I'm like, wow, this is absolutely fascinating. And to add on to the forensic issue is that there's not a lot of psychologists in this area. There's really not. Um, and so I'm also thinking, down the road, this is just more for my career, is that there are going to be more cases about this. We're seeing more and more, and that I think it's really important for psychologists to be able to position themselves not only to be able to treat people with this, but also when those cases go to court, to be experts and to be able to discuss this and really understand the psychological harms of some of these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just turn and segue into a little bit of your work in the private practice as
Hmm.
well, because we've spoken previously about significant privacy issues that you're currently facing right now with regard
Hmm.
to patient records. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's happening and how you're navigating that?
Sure. So for those of you outside the US might not be aware, is that our, oh, I don't even know, Secretary of Health, I can't remember his official title. Basically, what they're trying to do is create an autism registry to study autism, and they're discussing taking information from practitioners and insurance companies and literally creating a registry for this. Um, as a practitioner, like my private practice, we had, as soon as that hit the news, my partner and I were like, oh no, we're not doing this. Like we are not being involved in something like that. So we are very, very careful about our data. We have multi encryptions and things like that because we don't want any of our patients' data to be released because, you know, first of all, it's wrong. I mean, on so many levels, I don't even know where to start. So that's something that I'm really upset about happening here. And it's something I'm really trying to protect. I can't protect everybody. I know that. So I'm very conscious of just trying to protect, like, especially like the patients within my practice and making sure that anything that we do, um, it's not going to go into that registry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it raises a lot of red flags and concerns
Hmm.
around that you're carrying out, but so many other people are also victims perhaps
Hmm.
of their data being shared. It seems completely unethical from an
Hmm.
immediate standpoint. And I wonder where that goes.
Right. It's quite scary because I mean it's not just the autism registry like we were talking about. Like it could be anything. I mean, it's so important to be able to make those healthcare decisions, like whatever they might be, whatever, whether it's your mental health decisions or medical decisions, without government interference, and to make sure that your information is private. Because there is discrimination against mental illness. There is a lot of discrimination against people with autism, and it is not stood, like I see what's on TikTok and stuff. I'm like, oh gosh, that's not autism. Like that's, yeah.
It's incredibly personal, isn't it? And that's quite concerning and worrying. I know that you mentioned that's happening in the US, but beyond kind of worldwide, if that stance is taken, it's quite concerning. So I
Hmm.
totally appreciate your concerns on that. And I guess beyond your clinic, you're also involved in some fascinating work in the wider tech landscape. You sit on the software safety standards panel at the
Hmm.
Internet Safety Labs. I hope I've referenced that correctly. Work is taking place there right now, and why is this sort of oversight so crucial in the world
Hmm.
we're living in right now?
Yeah, I'm so lucky to be able to work with them. But basically, what they're trying to do is they're trying to define online harms and really do a lot of product safety testing for software. So it's one
Okay,
of one of the first organizations to do stuff like that. So they're um, oh gosh, right now they're working on like a digital harms dictionary and defining the harms and finding ways to measure the harms and then being able to develop almost like when I look at what they're developing, it looks almost like, like the calorie thing that they put on the back of food labels. That's what it reminds me of. Like it will have like all of the ratings and what the dangers are and what the harms are with different ratings. And I think that's just so important. It's always important to be I'm very big on informed consent so that you should know what you're using and decide whether or not you're willing to take that risk.
wow, that sounds like incredibly vital work, especially
Hmm.
like I say, in the world we live in today. Is it run by a group of experts, Genevieve, or is it something that yourself is working on, or how is that working?
Yeah, it's a group of experts and they've opened their doors to me, which is fantastic because they're I love it. I love it because it's not my normal people because they're all very they're like software engineers and like people have been in the tech business forever. So they just look at things differently and it's been really fun having those conversations with them. And it's just an incredibly interesting and diverse group of people. And they're not just in the US. There's also some folks up in Canada as well.
Amazing. That sounds incredibly interesting. I'd love to hear more further down the road how this progress goes with that project.
Thank you. Yeah, I just think they're fantastic. I love them.
Yeah, absolutely. And in your consulting work, you focus on something called trust and safety by
Hmm.
design. For listeners that might not be familiar with that phrase, what does it mean in practical terms?
Well, I take yeah, as I do that, I take a little bit of a different stance than a lot of other folks who do trust and safety just because of my background. So what I'm looking at is building things within the product that ensure that the product is safe to use and that the users trust I mean, it's, yeah, the trust and safety, obviously, but yeah, I'm looking specifically from like a behavioral science and psychological standpoint. So if you're, you know, working on an app for kids, that it is appropriate for the kids, that it's not going to cause them any harm, that parents can trust that what they're, signing up for, it's okay. Um, so it's stuff like that, and I look at what the potential harms could be and how it could be used. And it's also so important for businesses as well to develop that trust with their consumers because when that trust is lost, they've lost their customers.
Yeah, I'm curious to know on that front actually. How open are companies with building that into their product development?
Um, I more this is just my experience. This is anecdotal. But I've noticed that more EU-based companies are more interested in building that into their products, and I don't know if it's due to like the GDPR and the AI Act over in the EU, or if it's just they're more aware of it and more attuned to human rights, whereas America's very capitalistic. And I'm not saying anything bad about this. It's no judgment, but And I've also noticed that smaller companies are much more inclined to do this as well.
That's a really interesting perception, and that's why I asked the question. Here, obviously, we run the National AI Awards, so we're working with a lot of
Hmm.
innovators as well as companies that have used AI development for years. So it's really interesting to hear that take. Um, I want to pivot a little bit to something we touched on maybe earlier in this episode, around the impact of mental health and AI. And you've been vocal about risks and potential
Hmm.
risk therapy bots, and wellness apps. But where do you see, or do you see, real promise in these tools, or do you think there's potential concerns and red flags around them? I'm interested
Hmm.
on your thoughts on it.
The answer is both for that. So there's definitely a need. Um, I don't know if it's a need, but yeah, there's definitely areas where AI can be very helpful in terms of mental health. Um, One of the things that's pretty rampant over here, have you seen the show The Pit yet with Noah Wyle?
No, I haven't personally.
Oh, I'm usually not like go watch this show, but they do one of the things that they do really well is that there's little bits about like the mental health system in the US in there. Like there's a one of the patients is sitting in a wheelchair and she's handcuffed to the wheelchair. There's somebody else in restraints. I mean, it's which is things that happen because one of the problems is that there's not enough mental health beds. Just hands down. There have been studies after studies of the what these individuals face just trying to get help, especially when they're in crisis. So I can see a huge area where AI could be helpful, like in the ERs when people are sitting there waiting for they just literally just sit there and wait. Like there's no treatment, there's nothing. They may get meds. Sometimes people clear up if they have psychosis and they give them some Haldol or some medications. They can clear up enough to where they don't meet criteria for involuntary commitment and they leave without getting any real treatment. Um, so I could see AI being very helpful there. I can also see apps being helpful as well. I don't want to just say that no app is going to be helpful because there are some out there that are trying to do the right thing. Um, because there are some people who aren't comfortable with therapy. There are people who aren't comfortable reaching out for help, and you don't want to exclude them from it because, like I'm not going to use AI. But I think the problem is these apps are coming out so quickly. And a lot of times there's not a psychologist or somebody who's really trained in mental health on the back end helping to design them. Um, I do know of, I mean, there are a couple of good ones out there, like Help Text. It's not really an app, but it is tech based. Like there's a psychologist who works with the development and on the board and stuff, and so I've talked to them and what they're doing. They're trying to be very ethical and do no harm, all that stuff. But yeah, also like there's things that people who aren't psychologists or who aren't therapists don't understand about some of the duties that we have, especially over here. Like we have the duty to warn, we're all mandated reporters. What we have, there's also the civil commitment laws. So if somebody is suicidal, like what you have to do, the steps you have to take, and that's not getting built into apps.
Wow, that's incredibly interesting, and it, of course, ties back to perhaps to what we mentioned earlier in the episode about the character AI, where there's
Hmm.
a psychologist character per
Hmm.
se that users can interact with, but how is that being built into the back end? Is it just a character, or is it coming from an actual psychologist's
Hmm.
advice? I mean, although it's labeled as entertainment, it can be really misleading.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. Hmm.
I guess what kind of responsibility do you think companies have when they offer tools like this, and what should the users be keeping in mind when
Hmm.
they engage with those platforms?
Ah, yeah. I mean, there's responsibilities I think they should take on, versus what legally they have to, which is not a whole lot at this point, because they can just slap on, hey, this is for entertainment purposes only, and that's it. It doesn't matter. You use that. It's at your own risk. I think that's a bit weak, but for individuals, just be really careful about what you use. Also, look at what how the AI is trained, because anything that you put into an AI system, um, it can be used to train that AI. So you've just essentially given your personal information away, like just willingly, like, hey, um, yeah, and just be, I mean, and the other thing too is like, I can't teach everybody about manipulation or about influence. Like, I wish I could. That's something else to be aware of is that AI is learning how to use manipulation and emotional manipulation and things like that. And I mean, it's learning from us. And so I think individuals should also be aware of that as well when they go to use these apps and look at the background. And there's no always like ask like how's the AI being trained? Where's the information coming from? I have no idea where that character AI psychologist is being trained. Not a clue. And I haven't played with it either. I've been tempted to see what it says, but I haven't played with it, so I don't know.
Yeah. For us that kind of sit in that tech space and know the questions to ask or the areas to look for information and answers to those questions, of course it's easy to say. But
Hmm.
for regular kind of Joe Blogs, has never used tech before, thinks that this is going to be a really great product perhaps for them to be using, they don't know the questions to
Right.
ask. And I guess there's a lot of investment that should be happening into AI education and understanding the tools and the threats and
Hmm.
the concerns, all those aspects before, utilizing such a serious product in
Hmm.
some cases. And I suppose that kind of leads into the bigger picture of AI governments and data ethics and
Hmm.
why is it so important to include more voices from, I guess, humanities and social
Hmm.
sciences in shaping tech policy and development.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's a big question. Well, and at the end of the day, it's all about people. People are going to be using it. People are going to either be helped or harmed by it. It's so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, I mean, it's so important, duh. But I was speaking to someone who has a PhD in communications who works in tech and does some tech consulting. And there was things that they were talking about that I wasn't even aware of, just because they're very understanding about nuances of language and about different cultures and subcultures and all of those things. And I was like, wow, like this is why we need people like you in this because AI is training, AI is doing its thing. I lived in the UK for 2 years, so I know that words here in the US do not mean the words that they do in the UK, and I had some very fun and interesting um, moments dealing with that. So I think that's important too because AI is learning from us. It is like learning from language input. Having people who understand different languages and different the cultural significance of language, stuff like that. And I grew up in Philadelphia. Philadelphia has words that are not used anywhere else. Like it. Hmm.
And I guess wherever that product's being created and the information is being generated, that may be the case. It may appeal to an audience in the US, but like you say, does not translate outside of the US. I like to always head our podcasts out on a lighter note. I know we've talked
Hmm.
about a lot of heavy discussions today around mental health, ethics, and all that good stuff in between. But if you could wave a magic wand and
Hmm.
change one thing about how we approach technology, mental health, privacy, what would it be and why?
Oh, oh my
Big
goodness.
question.
Wow, where would I even start with that? I think, you know what? Oh, this is tough to answer because there's like 800 things that I would love to try. The big one would be I wish I could teach people about manipulation and propaganda and all of that. I think that comes down to the most important because and to understand how technology influences you and how it influences children. I think that's what I would change first is for people to be very aware of that. Um, there's a book I'm reading right now about how tech is designed to get kids addicted. Not, I don't want to say addicted to it, but to increase usage of it for children and to get them, so that they use it their entire lives. Like, I would like to see more people aware of that. I think if I could wave a magic wand, that would be where I start.
That's a great answer and something we've actually not had before. And I think on that, education again is that root, isn't it?
Hmm.
30 years ago, tech in schools wasn't prevalent, whereas now there's children that grow up
Hmm.
from a very young age with tech in their hands, knowing how to use it and knowing their
Hmm.
parents know how to use it. So it's that education piece, I think, again, isn't it? And I love that answer. Because it's incredibly interesting as well in the world that we live in today with geopolitics and
Hmm.
everything that's going on worldwide, to be aware of the information that we're consuming,
Hmm.
um, and the effect that it has on us.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you kind of took me down memory lane there, and you said, like, tech wasn't in school 30 years ago, and I'm gonna totally date myself on this. But I can remember when computers first came into school, and it was like the mid to late 80s. And we used
Okay.
to all like, and it was the only room in the school that had an air conditioner because the
Wow.
computers couldn't get hot. And they would like take us down once a week, and we would do things like make banners on like that old paper that like, with like the preparations, and then we'd all sit and like color it, and we played Oregon Trail and yeah.
Wow. It's
Hmm.
amazing, really, isn't it, how rapidly evolving the tech world is, but
Hmm.
equally, more specifically to what we're talking about in AI, how quickly that's evolving and the product development in that space. So
Hmm.
really fascinating talking to you today and learning more about it and the crossroads that perhaps some companies are at with their development and how you support them with it. I think it's clear that we need more voices like yours shaping the future of tech and mental health and being really open and honest about it. To be fair, um, and having these authentic conversations about how we move things forward in a positive way, but use AI to the best of its ability, but
Hmm.
ethically. I think that's the
Yes.
key, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Because I use AI. I use it in my everyday. I'm just very careful about which ones I use and what the privacy settings are.
Yeah. I'm sure that our audience will find this episode as interesting as I have because I've loved our conversations to date and loved having this one with you and asking all of those sorts of questions. So thank you so much for featuring on the podcast.
Well, thank you
Uh,
for having me.
to our listeners, if you have enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to our channel, join our community over on LinkedIn, follow Genevieve. You're on LinkedIn yourself, aren't
Yep, absolutely.
And if there's anywhere else that you'd like to signpost people to or any resources that you feel may be helpful,
Hmm.
please feel free to do a little shout out. But that's all from me. Thank you to everybody listening. And thank you, Genevieve, for joining me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really had a nice time today.